Good evening and welcome to the August the 8th meeting of the Planning Policy Commission. Tonight we're going to talk about the amendments to the Old Town Code. But first of all, we need an approval of the minutes.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of July 25th, 2019.
A second?
A second?
Any discussion? Changes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries.
Excellent.
So we're going to open it up to Kristen so she can explain a little bit of why we're looking at the amendments and what they are.
Hello. I'm Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner with the Development Services Department. And yes, tonight we are starting our process of implementing the Old Town Development Code amendments. So there are a few different pieces that are involved here. We'll get to that. First of all, I'm going to give a little history for those who haven't been here. The plan was originally adopted back in 1999. It then was not touched again until 2009 when we made some minor amendments by removing any references to the proposed bypass that were in there. In 2014, Council asked us to put some more energy. We had finished Central Issaquah and the plan and the standards there, and Council said we've sort of been not paying attention to Old Town for a while, so let's refocus over there. So in 2015, we put together a task force. Now, the task force was made up mostly of people who were business owners and associated with DIA. It was mostly focused on this cultural and business district on Front Street and parts of East Sunset Way. The task force made some recommendations. The council liked the recommendations, but they said we need to pay more attention to housing as well. So we took the recommendations, one of which was please update the Old Town Subarea Plan, the code and the standards, and expanded it to include residential as well. And that's where we are now. So in 2018, in December of 2018, the updated plan was adopted. And it went from a document that was about this thick to a document that you have in your packet that's about this thick, about 13 pages long. It was shortened, but I think it's a little bit more focused, more specific to Old Town than it was before. It's shorter. It includes the same chapters that the Central Issaquah Plan includes, which are community, connectivity and mobility, environment, economic vitality, and housing. Trying to get some consistency between our plans there. And then it also includes what other plans did not include, which is an action program. The action program identified fairly specific actions for us to take to implement the plan with certain timelines attached to them. So the ones that we will be looking at tonight are the immediate actions, of which there are 19 to be done in 2019 and 2020. The short-term actions are 2021 to 2022, and the rest are 2023 to 2030. These are the 19 actions that were adopted, and I don't intend to go over them all tonight, but the point is to show you that these were adopted in the plan and were directives for us to implement, which is what we are starting to do. We also included in your packet, and I understand this is hard to read, but we also included in your packet a status report of how we're doing so far on these. So number one up there is a piece that will start to run concurrently with this. It is updating the Old Town design standards and adopting new architectural guidelines. So we just signed on a consultant to do that with us, Meta Urban Design out of Denver, and you will meet her when she comes on September 12th for our open house to start that process. Tonight, we are focusing on 2 through 6 and 15, which are all amendments that take place inside our land use code and have to do with development, height, impervious surface, landscaping, that kind of thing. You'll notice we're not, and I've said this a few places, we're not doing landscaping right now. That'll happen in 1 or 2 different processes. We're trying to figure that out. Do you all have any questions from the packet about the status of any of these that are up here? So starting with actions, the immediate actions 2 and 3, excuse me. Number 2 was to make code revisions to reduce heights to 3 stories in the CBD and 3 stories in MFH and 2 stories in single-family duplex. MFH is multifamily high, and the cultural and business district is CBD. Number 3 is to make code revisions in the CBD to increase the impervious surface to 95% and increase the impervious surface in MFH to 75%. They're pretty specific. So right now, the existing base height in the CBD is 45 feet. You can go up to 65 feet with conditions, things like you do step backs or wedding cake once you get above three stories. And our proposed is that we cap it at 40 feet or 3 stories, whichever is higher. Whichever is lower. And then the other one is existing impervious, as I said, is 85, and the proposed is to increase it to 95. So there are some samples of buildings here. Here, just perspective, you have a 20-foot, it's about 20 feet. This building right here, which I always call the EU building, is about 37 feet approximately. And then the library at this point is about 42 feet. So that would become what's called legally non-conforming. So they could not increase the height, again, above 42 feet. They cannot make something that's non-conforming more non-conforming. But if they're under the impervious surface and they wanted to expand out just a little bit, they could still do that. Any questions about that one?
What does out just a little bit mean?
So if their impervious surface currently is 85% and they built out at 75%, they could build out to 85%
I mean
impervious.
forward, so cutting back on the sidewalk, or out?
Well, they're already at a 0 lot line, but say back in the back where the parking lot is, if they have room back there against that building line, then yes, they could.
In general, I'm not focusing on the
Right,
lot. I'm just,
but you're right. They can't go in front of the setback, whatever that setback may be, but as long as it's within the setback and within the impervious surface allowance.
So Kristen, explain the rationale of the value and why the city wants to go from, or powers that be want to go from 85 to 95 or up to 75%. What is the rationale?
So the rationale, well, really, it's that the task force asked for it, was a part of it. Their first preference was that in the urban villages, you can go to 100% impervious, and they really wanted that. They said, if we can't have that, we'd like 95%. But part of it is that it's hard for them to develop. They need more impervious to be able to get the parking that they need in there. That was their biggest argument when the task force was talking about it.
When they talk about parking, are they talking about on-site parking
They're talking about required on-site parking.
on Front Street?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you explain a little about the impervious surface?
Oh.
That what your
Sure.
grade drawings
So this is the GIS version of this, so it's the exact same thing. You can see this right here, this is Front Street on this side. This is First Avenue on the other side, to the west of it. You can see that on Front Street right here, most of these properties were developed so long ago. The dark parts are the buildings, the light parts are the parking lots and sidewalks. Many of these buildings are already at or close to 95%. They were built so long ago, and the standards came in after a lot of these buildings were built. These buildings over here on First Avenue still have room to expand. So say on this parcel right here, these buildings could actually expand out and increase their impervious surface, whether it be building or parking lot, to about what this is right here. Does that help?
So, quick question. Are you referring to the actual building size? The building could actually take up 95% of the lot so desired?
If you have
Or are you
parking
talking about
underneath.
building and parking? Or is it both?
It's building and parking, because I believe the setbacks here are 0.
And that would mean. you
Right,
could
so
put
it
the
could be
parking
the
underneath,
entire building.
too.
Okay, so the entire building could take up the entire lot.
It could. because they have a zero, they don't have a setback.
And these buildings, right now, they're already close to 95, 90%?
Many of them are. Yes. And these are also zone CBD, which is why I showed these to you, because a lot of these aren't on the street to the west.
So in that spirit of conversation and going to 95%, the city does like to emphasize pervious surfaces. So if we're going to go impervious to 95%, how are we going to mitigate the water runoff? Is it,
So that's done where they can, and Trish can answer this better than I can because she talks to the stormwater guys, but it's done on site. When they can do it, it's done on site. And if it can't be done on site, then they infiltrate.
Opposite. They have to try to infiltrate first for stormwater, and if they can't infiltrate, then they have to do all of it on their property. So it would be the same regulations as they have to do now.
so I don't quite understand what you mean when you say infiltrate.
For stormwater, our requirements are you have to first try to infiltrate your stormwater on your site, meaning, going down into the water table. And if your property isn't able to do that, which a lot of our properties are not able to do that, then you have to take care of your stormwater on site, either through the vaults or whatever facilities works best with your site plan. And those regulations are not changing with these code amendments.
Okay, so the getting back to the conversation, if we go from 85 to 95, technically there is a net zero when it comes to actual water runoff, correct? Because we're going to make them,
Because that doesn't change,
Right.
correct?
right, so there's no benefit to environmental standards if we go to 95%, because if they build a new building or do a major remodel, then they're going to have to take care of all their water runoff anyways.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
Have you, given all that and the size of a lot of these lots as I'm seeing, have you guys modeled combining the changes in zoning and the pervious change, and there's no setback changes? Have you modeled to see what the impact would be? I mean, on-site filtration is an extremely expensive thing. So I'm looking at these, if that was the way somebody'd have to go. So I'm just wondering if you guys have modeled what is the real effect, what is the real effect of these changes to what we might see in Old Town going forward, market assuming, Have you looked at that, or is it just, look, people wanted this and it's marginal, so okay?
Do you mean stormwater only, or do you
No, I'm
mean
talking
total?
about development here. We've got height restriction changes, we've got no setback change, we've got water runoff effects that may de minimis, and we've got parking changes. So I'm wondering if, on an overall basis, have you done a study, okay, if everybody built the way to the maximum we've permitted, what the marginal effect would be in Old Town?
Marginal effect environmentally or
Oh, no.
aesthetically or?
In terms of developed square footage, which is what we're all after here. I mean, this is what, ultimately, that's what we're talking about here.
Right. No.
And
No.
I'd step in to say, that was one of the questions that we were asked about parking. Does giving an incentive for neighborhood-oriented businesses, does that actually help? Or would switching to the Central Issaquah standards help businesses more because of the parking requirements? And so we modeled, scenarios, changes of use, or a whole new building, and a building with a dentist and residential. So we tried to do all the scenarios that we could think of, and then figure out the parking as it exists today, as the proposal shows, and then as Central would show. And that's what was on the little chart in the frequently asked questions, because we were trying to make sure that the regulations do help businesses. So we did do a little bit of modeling, but we didn't do all of the CBD or all of the East Sunset Way. As you know, all of the properties in the CBD are developed to at least 30 feet, other than maybe the two little houses that are right, near the theater. But all the others are, pretty much to a height that's either 30 feet or less, except the theater has the fly tower that's 65. And I think one of the things that folks told us in the 3 or 4 years we did the plan was, what happens when the first 65-foot building comes in? Can we take the height down now before all of a sudden the whole character is changed because we've got this big building, and then it's like, oh, did anybody know that could happen? And so this was sort of preemptive before we get any really big buildings to try to take the heights down on Front Street and on Sunset Way so that we don't get that, the one that sort of throws the character off from what we would like to see there. Does that
Or
help?
worse yet, multiple buildings reaching 65 feet and we lose the view of the mountains.
Right. Good point.
Is there, I didn't see any reference to what I understand is the plan to significantly change East Sunset Way by taking away street parking. As I recall it, taking away all street parking for East Sunset and adding a median strip and a couple of turn lanes that are not there now.
So
I just didn't see any reference to that in the.
Yeah, ours would
Right.
only be the code, the regulations. That would be the street. I don't know
Right,
how far
that
that
covers
went.
right of way. So that covers right of way, and we cover
Yeah.
outside the right of way. So
Right.
no, there has not.
So the parking, but the change in the parking requirements is not affected by the plan to remove street parking.
Correct, because that's
East.
public parking. The street parking is public, whereas this parking is private parking that we're talking
So
about.
this is all private parking I thought it was just all, when you're adding it up to where people can park to use CBD.
So the regulations that we're talking about now address only private parking.
Okay.
Yes.
However, you're right, Randy, that if you're visiting the dentist or the theater, you're certainly able as the visitor to park in the on-street parking, but those are public to everybody, first come, first serve.
And they do go hand in hand, and I was talking with Economic Development today, and we were talking about the parking study and how the parking study is kind of two-pronged. It looks at, according to the park, and you all, I think, saw it, and parking is sufficient, and I think it's at like 63%, and it's at 85% when you start to really make changes to what's happening with the parking. And the task force asked for less parking because it is hard for them to get all the parking on there that they need. But they also asked for more public parking. So the purpose of the report is to watch those two and see how the balance works. And once it starts to get up towards that 85%, okay, we need to really fix something. Where are we going to adjust the parking? So it's been taken into consideration, just not as much here as in the parking study.
One last point of clarification. There's some of the parking in that area that you're showing right there that says for customers only and, will be towed. So it's not clear to me how that's factored into this. Private parking, it's
Right.
because it's right next to those buildings, but it very clearly says you park here, you're going to get towed. I don't know if that's ever been done, but
I don't know if it's been done either, and it's kind of funny because some of this where you see those signs, it is actually on that person's property.
right.
Some of the places where you see the signs, it's actually on city property. So I found that out today, too. So I don't know if it's ever been enforced.
You don't know where to go get your car after it's been towed.
Exactly.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Okay, are you ready? Okay. So similar situation on, this is still MFH, still actions 2 and 3, and this deals with multifamily high, where the existing height is 40 feet, and you, again, can go up to 65 feet with conditions. And we are proposing 40 feet or 3 stories max, just like in the cultural and business district. The existing impervious is 50%, and we are proposing to increase that to 75%. I know it's a big jump, but we're also, at the same time, want to encourage more retail businesses on Sunset. So if you're going to do that, you need to allow for a little bit more impervious so that they can get their parking in there. That's all I have. Do you have any questions about this one?
And just a quick thought on page, depends on
Are you
which
gonna show my
page numbers.
X?
Page 24 of 63, or page 2 of 24, depending on which set of page numbers. We accidentally had a typo on multifamily high. We said that it used to be 35 feet, and that we're changing it higher to 40 feet, when actually it was 40 feet originally. So there's actually not a change.
I put an X through it
To
right
that
here
height.
to show that we recognize that, and we've taken it out. But, cutting and pasting, I don't know how I did that, but go figure.
But just wanted you to know that was actually not really a change.
Any questions on multifamily high? And the multifamily high applies to East Sunset Way, essentially east of here, all the way down to the freeway to 6th. And it's just the properties that are facing front. Everything behind these properties is zoned single-family duplex. Okay. So continuing with 2 and 3, what we realized when we were doing these changes is that we were limiting the maximum height of multifamily high to 40 feet or 3 stories, whichever was lower. Multifamily medium was actually, base height was 40 feet, but they were still allowed to go up to 50 feet with conditions. And we just thought, well, multifamily high is supposed to have more density. Multifamily medium, where we are, a lot of it abuts the creek and can't go above 35 feet anyway. So we decided to propose that the same thing as multifamily high, so 40 feet or 3 stories max, whichever is lower. So if you're wondering where multifamily medium is, this is the creek that runs all through here. Multifamily medium is just west of the CBD and right in here. And you can see how much of this is either abuts or is within 200 feet of the creek, which then they have to follow the shoreline regulations, which limits their impervious surface and limits their height, no matter what our code says. So we threw that one in as well. Questions? The impervious surface would not change. It would remain the same at 50%.
So what then would be the difference between multifamily high and multifamily medium?
That multifamily medium does not get an increase in impervious surface to 75%. It remains at 50%.
And they're,
That's the difference.
Yes.
right, and the multifamily medium density is 14.52 an acre, and high is 29 an acre.
Is that-
So that doesn't change.
Right. Any questions? All right. Moving on to Action 15. I never said we were going in order. Action 15 is develop incentives that reduce parking requirements for neighborhood-oriented commercial projects. That's what it says in the plan. So we talked about it and came up with a proposed incentive that says to, in the CBD, to allow an additional 10% reduction in the number of spaces in the CBD zone for neighborhood-oriented businesses. So this doesn't preclude any businesses from coming to the CBD. It does hopefully incentivize those businesses that would serve the daily needs of people who could walk there if they needed to. And then reduce the parking and maybe make it easier for some of those businesses to come in. We define neighborhood-oriented businesses as some of you who were here for the plan may remember we talked about franchise businesses. So it's the reverse of that. Or neighborhood-oriented businesses have 10 or fewer locations throughout the United States, and they cater to the daily needs of the local community. Exceptions to neighborhood-oriented businesses include grocery stores and medical services. Now, we realize that that might sound like we don't want those, but we actually do want grocery stores and medical services, so we would propose clarifying that a bit to say we do want those uses. Another change that we are proposing is, we used to have back in 1986, we still had a map in there from 1986 that defined our downtown area. And it was a little odd. It did not include all of the cultural business district. It did include Memorial Park. And we are proposing to change that to include all of the CBD instead, and the properties, multifamily high on East Sunset Way. And what this includes is no additional parking required for change in use within the existing structure, and no additional parking required for structural additions that are 10% or less of the original gross floor area of the building. So those are the two changes we are proposing to parking.
So in the task force that you guys put together, made up of business owners in the district, were they, what were their views on only, or the majority of their customers from the immediate area, walking area? How would they compare it with what it is now, which is maybe a lot of customers from a lot of different areas?
Can you repeat that for me? I'm not understanding the
I don't think
question.
we asked them that, because that was before Front Street Market
So-
left. And I
right.
think that's when we realized how important it is to try to get local
Well, I
businesses.
understand it's important to get locals there, but as a business owner, if I was one, and I had a shop of some kind on Front Street, I would like to have as many customers as possible, and to limit it or to direct it just for the neighborhood, it's very difficult for me to understand that a business would be happy with that.
Right, and we're not saying it has to be limited. We're just giving you a bonus on less parking required if it is that kind of business. We're not limiting to say,
No, but the whole concept is less cars, more walking, more people in the neighborhood. These are neighborhood businesses. I don't know if I consider Front Street neighborhood businesses. Anyway, that's just my thought.
and we can ask them, they'll be coming, we're inviting them all to the public hearing. So we can try and ask them that to see if they have any feelings on the ratio of, you're wondering about the ratio of local people that can walk
What is
there?
it now, and what are you proposing you think the future is going to be? I think it's something that a business owner who is going in there would like to know.
Could you explain just in adding to that, because I share the same, my questions that you sent out, we share the same overall concern about parking and the nature of what a local business is. Could you explain the second change, no, the first one, change of use? What generated that, that proposed change? I'd never seen it before, and it strikes me that the city is losing control over something that's very important here. If I change from a laundromat to a restaurant, change of use. Huge differences in parking, irrespective of whether it's a local business or not. And when I add all these things up, I just personally am growing increasingly concerned that we're going to be underparked.
So, and I get that because that's come up before. First thing, actually 1 and 2 that are down there under B, those have actually been in place since 1986 when the LID was adopted.
Right.
And in trying to, being that the objective here was to try and make parking easier on property owners, we left it in there for now. However, the land use code, as you probably know, Title 18, is going under a huge, I'm going to call it renovation, but that's not the right word, but it is being overhauled right now. Part of what's being addressed is parking. So we didn't want to touch too much of the parking right now because one of the things that's being considered is that you might have, say, urban or, denser parking requirements and then suburban parking requirements. Right now we have Old Town and Central and Issaquah Highlands and Tallis and all these different things. And trying to simplify and get some consistency in there, the proposal is to have potentially urban and potentially suburban. So we didn't want to touch the rest of it right now. And I will tell you that our land use manager was not thrilled with this because she's like, what do you mean you could get a 35% reduction? So it's being looked at, but under the big picture of things, didn't want to touch anymore right now. Okay, so we'll see what happens there.
And to answer the specific scenario of going from, I just can't help but
Yep, no.
jump in. When you say truly a laundromat is very different than a restaurant, but here in Old Town, because remember, this is the original plat of Issaquah over 100 years ago, they're this big. So the laundromat, if it changes, I hope it doesn't, but if it changes to a restaurant, it's only 1,000 square feet. So as a restaurant, you're only going to have, how many tables can you fit in? 1,000 or 2,000? You're only going to have 5 tables. So yes, the parking is going to be different, but it's such a small scale that it's not like you go from a laundromat that's the size of Red Robin to a Red Robin that you need, 35 places. You're only this big, and you're only going to have 5 tables or 4 washing machines. Everything in Old Town is really small, and we're trying to help them still thrive by not making them have suburban parking space requirements. We're trying to let them live and thrive in their small way, but still be viable. And so you're right, they are different uses, but because they're so small, it sort of washes out that even though you're a furniture store or a restaurant, you're still only small. Great,
True
but
on
you're
East
only
Sunset,
small.
too? This applies along East Sunset, too.
This would apply
This-
along
this
East
would be
Sunset
new
as
for
well.
East Sunset.
Are larger.
Right.
Right.
I'm seeing the funeral home maybe change. I'm just making up a story here.
Right.
The point is, change is not being reflected in parking ratios. That's all I'm saying.
Correct.
And you're saying, yes, true, we get it. Okay, move on, right?
Right, well, no, but we're trying to
move
show
on,
you
but
that
it
it's
will be
it's
looked at.
special, because Old Town is special. It's not Gilman Boulevard where you have so much parking, you lose your car, or the Highlands that was able to actually plan it, so they have under-building parking and behind. Or Old Town, we're stuck with this great old plat that everything is teeny tiny, and we're trying to make the best of that for not only the community, but for the business owners.
So I have a scenario that I'd like to throw out, because
Okay.
it's kind of one of those things, I think we're speaking to it. If I'm a landowner, one of these businesses along Front Street,
Okay.
and I have the ability to go to 95%, what's stopping me from building out the building to the full capacity of the lot and say, I'm not worried about parking, I'll just have my customers park in other people's lots?
The fact that
can't,
you are
'cause that's
required
not-
to put in parking. You're
that's
still
not a
required to
change of
put in
use.
parking.
How much parking?
Whatever.
Depends what your use is.
Yeah, it depends, exactly. It depends on
If
what
I
your
have a
use is or how
restaurant-
large your site is.
And so if I have a restaurant and I want to put in a large restaurant, right? and my
So you're
lot is-
adding to your building? You're not just a change of use, you're adding?
I'm adding, yes, I'm
Okay.
adding to the building.
Because that
so-
changes things, then you have to add parking.
So what's the largest building I could put, lot size? So just think of it, if it's only 1 story, it's the largest building I could put on that property to,
As long as you meet your setbacks and you meet your parking, let's say you can do under-building parking or under, your first floor, as long as you have retail on the front, you can max out the whole thing as long as you meet your setbacks and meet your parking. And
what is my parking?
Depends on the use
It depends
or
on
the
your
square
use.
footage or the number of units. Depends on what you're building.
Page 14 has what the current standards are versus what the proposed.
right, there's scenarios.
Thank you, Bill.
But if you just changed your use, you wouldn't have to provide any more parking. We would be happy with what you had in your restaurant. But if you're expanding, then we take a look at it, and you may have to add parking.
So I build out a building that is maximum size, and let's just say it's a very small office. So my use is very minimal in terms of the amount of people that are going to be in the building, so I may not need that much parking, right? What if I decide to lease it out to a different tenant and they want to put in a restaurant?
Are you adding to the building?
I'm not adding to the building, the
Then you don't
building's
have
already
any-
been built out.
Then you don't have to add parking.
Here's the thing, I've already built the building out to meet one use, and that use disappears.
Right.
Now I'm releasing the building to a new use, and the new use is a restaurant.
As long as you're not expanding the building, you don't have to add any parking.
So, well, here's the point, I've already expanded out the building.
When did you expand it?
Yeah.
Did we ask
So
you to do
today-
additional parking when you expanded it?
So let's just, today, I'm building out a new building.
Okay, today we make you put extra parking.
Okay, so I'm going to build out the building, and I'm going to have 5 people, it's going to be a small office, custom office, there's going to be five people in the building or 10 people in the building at
Okay.
any one time.
Yeah, we don't, that doesn't bother us, how many people you have in there.
So then 2 years from now, that business model disappears and I have a piece of property that I want to lease out and someone says, I want to put a restaurant in there. And they build out to the maximum square footage of the building because the building's already built.
Okay, so they don't build out the maximum, it's already,
It's already maxed
at
out.
that point, it's a change of use and you don't need any more parking.
Wow.
So just to confirm, the way I read this,
It's a loophole.
the way I read this, every building, the parking spaces are designed by the square footage of the building itself. The only thing that falls out of that rule are medical buildings and office buildings,
And residential buildings.
residential. If it was a laundromat and it moved to a restaurant, there is no change. It's not treated differently. It's only treated differently for residential, office, or medical.
Or if you're expanding the building, we
The square footage
reassess.
changed and I'm in my
Yeah,
square
but
footage
if you're
rule.
changing,
Correct.
then it's flush.
same, yeah.
Right.
To
And
my-
that's because you're in Old Town.
I agree with you.
This is the part that I don't understand. I have an intended use that I built the building out to the maximum lot size possible for this intended use. That intended use didn't work out so well, and so I have to rethink and get a new tenant in there. And the new tenant says, great, I can put it in a restaurant, and I can put 200 seats in there. It's a change in use, but
I
the
would-
building's already maxed out.
I would question the scenario that you could get that many people in a building here.
But, so I built a luxury office suite. So imagine every office I have
It's square
is
footage.
1,000
doesn't-
square feet.
Okay,
So, or, my point is, I'm building a building for an intended use,
right,
one intended use.
yes,
And I built out to the maximum square footage
Right.
that lot would allow me to do.
right.
And I'm only having maybe 10 people, so the land use impact is actually very
Right.
minimal. That business model disappears.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have a new business model that has lots and lots of people. That creates a significant parking problem on Old Town because it's a really popular restaurant.
We would say to try to use some street parking, to have your employees park off-site in some of the public areas. I mean, if it actually you're there, you're operating and there's a problem, we would work with you and the neighbors to try to solve it. But the code, the way the code is, we're trying to not have empty storefronts. And if your business bombed and you need to do another one, we don't want to penalize you by making you add parking in an area where physically there's no land to have more parking. So we're trying to help businesses thrive and be okay here without putting demands that they aren't able to make, because geographically, there's no land to put the parking on.
And Trish, is it not correct that according to this information that we got, there is a surplus of parking available?
Correct,
There is.
In Old Town?
correct.
At the max use of the existing, of the businesses down there right now. So at the busiest
Correct.
time for Old Town businesses, there is a double-digit surplus
Correct.
parking
Yes.
in the CBD.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
But the comment was made that's inefficiently located. So
Well, it's a
that-
3 to 6 minute walk.
Right, and you figure
mean,
if you're in
isn't that-
Seattle, that
isn't
would
that
be
ju-
brilliant to be that close.
But isn't that what the
Right.
numbers were, 3 to 6 minutes?
Or, I don't know
believe
if it was
so.
minutes or blocks, but it's about the same.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's no different than Seattle. If you park for a restaurant, you're going to walk 2 or 3 blocks at least to get to that restaurant.
Right, and you'll be happy to do it if you can get that close.
And it's just assumed that that's the way it's going to be, so,
Right.
I live in Kirkland, it's the same thing.
yeah.
I just think the strategy is a little flawed, though, because if you're making that based on, you're going to allow someone to build out the lot or put a building on there based on the amount of use is going to determine their parking. The use will change, the building doesn't change. So now you're going to be, basically what you're saying is non-conforming parking.
Would you rather have an empty storefront?
No, but what I'm just saying is why even have that rule in there at all? Because businesses don't last forever, and so what you're going to end up having is potentially Lots of big buildings with different uses over the next 20 years.
Well,
and-
I think we're hoping that you're a super successful restaurant, but your restaurant patrons may have to park a few blocks away because you're that great of a restaurant, and I don't think that's a bad thing. You know, it's like the
And this-
theater.
and
The
this has been
theater,
a-
people park all over to go to the theater.
I'm just-
And
well,
this has
what-
been in place for 33 years,
Right, but
and
I
there
mean,
hasn't
we're-
been an issue so far.
because we haven't had an urban core, the aspirations of the urban core is coming, right? So, I mean, I know it's not built yet, but the idea is that we're supposed to be looking 20 years out. So if we have a developed urban core.
That's what Central's being built out as.
Correct.
That's
Right,
high
this is-
density.
Absolutely.
Right, and to,
That is
And I would
why
also-
here. Correct.
but to
very
my
different.
point, why would we limit what a landowner on Front Street can build out his property to today based on the land use if the land use could change? Or the store use, right? So we have a laundromat today, and it only has maybe a necessary requirement of 10 cars. The laundromat goes away, and now we have a restaurant go out there and say, well, we have hundreds of people showing up all the time, so we take up excessive amount of parking.
I think
So
we know
Ron,
that
can
the
I-
land
can I ask a
uses are
question?
going to
I don't
change.
understand your concern.
No.
I mean, are you suggesting that there won't be enough parking 10, 15 years from now?
What I'm saying
Because
is.
there is now.
Right, there is now. But what I'm saying is if we're putting restrictions on people today on land use, on owners, on how much parking they're going to need based on the use of the remodel building, the use of the expansion.
So I don't see this as a restriction for them. I see this as a benefit for them, and that they don't have to add parking, so it's easier for them to come in. And there's plenty of available public parking out there right now. And if it starts to hit that point where 85% of our parking is filled, then we address it, and we figure out how are we going to put more parking in here so that these businesses survive. So it's not a restriction, it's a benefit.
But I'm trying to speak to that. I just
Okay.
don't understand it. Because from what I'm reading here, it sounds like to me that we're adding restrictions on owners today, on land use owner or landowners, based on the building's current purpose. So if we say, I own property A, and I want to build a restaurant, I have to allow for X number of parking spaces, right? So that number might be, let's say, I have to build out for 50 parking spaces, or 25, I don't know, you kind of like,
Is it helpful if we go to the scenarios that are already built into the packet?
all right.
Because we tried to do like a new building versus just a change of use.
Can I just clarify one thing? Ron, what I'm hearing is that you're really more concerned that we have these specialized parking requirements based upon intended purpose and use for a specific property, and that creates a conflict potentially when you have this turnover in usage change, as opposed to maybe having just a uniform, doesn't matter what business purpose is going to be used there, in this CBD area, there would be a single parking requirement. Is that what you're saying?
Sort of to that point, it's why make the difference between a restaurant and a laundromat or a reading room?
And you want everybody to have 20 parking spaces. If you're uniform.
If you're going to build a building out to, let's say, 80% of the lot size, and I need X number of parking spaces because it's a reading room, so the reading room may get the classification, okay, you need 25 spaces because it's a minimal use. And then my neighbor next door, he builds out a restaurant and he needs 50 parking spaces because he may have more people.
Those
Then
numbers
my
are just-
reading room business model doesn't work out, and so the next tenant that comes in is a restaurant, and I only have 25 spaces. I've got more property used for a building, and now I have a competitive advantage over my neighbor.
Those numbers seem like really exaggerated. If you look at number 4, we could have a building as big as 3,000 square feet. We currently only require 4 parking spaces. We don't require 20 or 30 or 40 that you're calling out. And the new requirement proposed drops that to 3, so they are allowed to build out and have one less spot. So I don't see in the scenarios where we have buildings that are requiring 20 or 30 parking stalls, they're only requiring a handful, even
It's
for the largest.
14, Ron.
And even
14
number,
and 63.
even number 3, which has a restaurant in it, for your scenario, right now, it has a 3-story building, and this is a new one, and it has 0 parking stalls right now, because it's connected to the old LID site, which I'm probably pointing the wrong way, that way. And so it's going to have a building scenario of a 3-story building, 1,000 square foot restaurant, and 2,000 square foot medical office. And again, medical would be considered a neighborhood business, so that gets a 10% break. But as today, they would be required 14 total stalls for all the uses. With the changes that we're proposing, they need 13, so it's only a little bit of a break because of the neighborhood business. So we're not saying existing they need 13, the proposal they need 2. It's only just a little break. And if you were in Central and had to do this building, you'd have a minimum of 5 stalls, but a maximum of 18. So there's that sliding scale we have for Central.
And if I'm a business owner coming into that restaurant, medical building, and it's vacant, and I want to turn it into something else, let's say just office building, then I have to make the decision of losing, having a business with one less parking spot than I would have liked to have in the first place.
Right, knowing that your area has a surplus of parking, but not your exact parcel, right.
Well, example number 2, because I'm with Ron. I have, for what that's worth. I mean, I think that we can talk about each project, each site being a small incremental change. You add them all up, and it can be something substantial. And I know there's extra parking now, public and private, apparently, in this. I don't know what extra means. I'd like to know that. Is it 50 stalls or 25 overall? I think that's a question to ask. But if you look at example number 2, and when I mentioned in my email, I chose the wrong example number. I should have said example number 2.
What page?
Oh, sorry, it's page 2 of 8 or 14 of 63, depending on how you read this stuff. So it's just a simple change. It's an office building. It's a couple of thousand square feet, and it goes from residential to office. And if you look at the variances there, that's a substantial percentage change. And that's just one little site. So now you take, rather than 100 people, restaurants, and all that, you just take little sites and add up all these incremental changes. Eventually it means something. So I'm looking at this down the road and thinking, okay, we have extra parking now. I don't know how much extra means. So I have no idea what absorption would have to take place to eliminate that. And I think it's a question one could ask, is what does that mean, extra? Because you say there's extra
Right,
now.
I think Randy said 65% we were at.
Well, but
The
of
last
what?
parking study, 65.
At peak, we're at, I think, 63%
Here, I
full.
don't
Something like
remember
that.
the
But
exact-
yeah, it's a nice buffer.
Oh, 65% of what? I mean, how many is that? 65?
If 100% was everyone's parked, every space is taken, we're only 65%
At
of
the
that.
busiest time
Are there
of day.
300 stalls at 65% or 500?
Oh, I'd have to look at the parking study. I don't know that off the top of my
Well, the
head.
numbers don't matter,
What
though.
difference does it make?
Oh, it does, because if we start looking at the little changes like that 2,000 square foot office space, now example number 2, not 3, and add them up over the potential over the whole Old Town area, and plus growth in the overall Issaquah, I could very well see in 5 or 10 years, we're now in a real parking shortage. And assisted by the loss of control the city's engendered by allowing that kind of clause to go through. I'm just saying, I think there's a potential, and I think we've talked about all sorts of examples, but I still don't have in my mind even how many extra stalls there are, 65% of what? Is that only another 50 stalls, in which case I could easily see a couple of extra buildings, or maybe a transit center being developed somewhere in that area, or all sorts of things which quickly absorb that. So
Right.
I'm with Ron. I think there's a real question here.
Right, and I think to help our Economic Development Department that just finished the parking study. I think they do the study every 2 years
Yes.
Question.
to make sure, so we don't get 10 years down the road and realize we're totally gridlocked. You know, it's things that we change, you know, we're checking balances because so many things change. The uses change, the parking changes, the people in the neighborhoods change. Some of them walk more, all of a sudden some of them are older and they don't want to walk. And so we're monitoring all the time to make sure nothing gets out of whack. But at this moment, we're proposing, while we have this buffer of public parking and other parking, that we sort of let the stopgap out a little bit so that businesses have an easier time to compete with the Highlands and Gilman Boulevard. But you're right, if we just changed and then didn't look for 5 to 10 years, that would be scary, you're right, because it might way overbalance, you know, this teeter-totter that we're on and be a mess.
If we change these code amendments and they're not in sync with the overall plan, I mean, how does it work? I mean,
Well, that's what the plan is telling us to do, is to adjust, to make parking, that's what we're responding to, is the action in the plan.
You just said that this is being left in there because we're changing the
The code.
Reviewed.
code.
The code, the land use code, and, you know, quite honestly, this may come out, I don't know. But
Right, because that's part of next year, is
it's-
checking
right.
all the parking in the whole city.
Okay, so what we're talking about now actually is subject to review in a year or two, or is this a
Yes.
separate?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes,
And just to make clear, the data that's in here about CBD parking
yes.
says that at the maximum use period for all of the businesses in CBD, there is presently a double-digit, I don't remember, I'm not going to try to pull it out, but I underlined it in here, a double-digit surplus
Right.
of parking spaces. So of the 100% of all parking spaces downtown, there is a surplus at the busiest time of parking within I think I do remember a 3 to 6 minute walk of any specific business in
Correct.
CBD. Okay.
Correct. Are we moving on? Remember, you get another chance to look at this too, so if you have questions or want to come in and talk to us and say, let's sit down with the current planner and look at specific details, call us, and we'd be happy to do that.
I would like to say that the data in here for me was very interesting. I didn't expect to see a surplus of that magnitude. But as most of us know, there have been 2 downtown Front Street businesses that have disappeared in the last 2 weeks. And I don't know why. The Art East folks, we were there the day before it closed, and the people working there didn't know why it was being closed. But my fellow commissioners' points, I think, are even though, you know, we have a degree on or disagreement on a scenario, it is all about convenience for the shopper, whether they're visiting or whether they live here. And we've seen small towns get hammered by big box stores, and big box stores getting hammered by internet sales. So the objective, I think, for all of us here is to make sure that the small town character of Old Town, in terms of efficient businesses, is maintained and protected going forward. And a big part of that, with the emphasis on walking and biking in downtown, non-auto, is convenience from your car to the place of business, particularly in the winter here when it's raining. So I think the overall issue is frankly critical. So I understand the wish to study this in more granular terms, but at present, what I see going forward is surprisingly good. I mean, I've never had a problem getting to any place in downtown in a very short period of time, but I understand it's going to change, and that's what we're doing here. Thank you.
Bringing up the 2 businesses apparently have closed on Front Street. Do you ever do an exit evaluation and discuss with the businesses why. There's so much more than parking that causes a business
Right,
to
I
close.
think
We
Christopher
don't.
does, doesn't-
Economic Development
Economic
does
Development does.
surveys with the businesses every year. I don't know if they catch them as they go out, but I know they talk to them every year
I think
about
it's
where
extremely
customers are coming
important
from.
to getting more businesses in. You know, they had this problem, a hairdresser did not work in that particular area, so maybe we should, find something else that is more attractive to walkers.
I agree with Commissioner that an exit interview, whether it's, I think that would be critical. Are you saying it's not being done now?
No, I don't know if
No,
it
I
is.
think
I know that they do annual surveys and they talk to
Yeah.
the businesses. I don't know, so I will ask and find out and see
Right,
what
and
they
maybe
do.
we get Christopher to even come and explain the parking study and come and talk about the businesses.
That's a good idea.
If that would be helpful, to have our economic development
Yep.
fellows come and talk to us? They love talking about parking.
And I understand there's a real balance between parking and business and maintaining the character of the city of Issaquah. So, I mean, I understand that, and it's very difficult to have everything exactly in the right spot. You have to make some decisions based on something and hope that you've made the right decision. So the one thing I like is the fact that they are basing, like going from 85 to 95% impervious surface, they're basing on something. They're reasoning that if you get it wider and not higher, you're encouraging more businesses to come and develop. And so those are the good things that you have to remember with all the questions of how many parking stalls will somebody have. You just have to look at it one at a time. That's my thought.
Well said.
Anyway, let's go on.
Okay. Action number 6. Action number 6 was to code revisions to remove Old Town parcels as transfer of development receiving sites and they happen to be in the CBD, MFM, and MFH zones. So for those who don't know, we have something called a transfer of development rights program. And we have receiving sites, we've identified receiving sites, and we've identified sending sites. Sending sites are parcels where 50% or more of the property is encumbered by critical areas and would be very hard to develop, or maybe somebody doesn't want to develop because it's more expensive because of the critical areas. These people, it is a voluntary program. These people have the opportunity, if they want to sell their right to develop at a market rate price to someone who has a receiving site. Then that person with the receiving site gets to build higher. They pay for the development rights, market rate price. They get to develop higher or bigger with a larger FAR than they normally would. Now, the benefit of the Transfer of Development Rights program is that the public benefits because we get that sending site becomes permanent open space. So that's good for the environment and good for us. The developer gets to build more than he typically would have gotten to build. So I just wanted to explain to you what that was before I did this part, because what our proposal is to remove receiving sites. The idea, what we heard over and over again, is that people don't want more density in Old Town. So we have several, as you can see, the red ones we have here are receiving sites typically, and you can see the ones outside. Green are sending sites, and the gray are the receiving sites that we are proposing to remove from this area. So there are a lot here. They're mostly in the multifamily medium, multifamily high, and a little bit in the CBD zones that are out there. So this is one of the solutions to making sure that that density doesn't come here. And then we also took out, just technically, I didn't put them in here, but took out any references to Old Town or Sunset or MFH or anything that was in there that had to do with TDRs in those sections. Any questions about that one?
So a receiving site could receive TDRs from a site that wants to develop?
No. From a site that is covered in critical areas.
Like Park
So the
Point was
sending
a sending
site has
site.
critical areas that, and all, whatever could be developed there can be sent to the receiving site.
Right.
Okay.
And now the receiving sites are mostly in central Issaquah where we want the extra development. So those are the receiving sites,
Yeah.
most of them now.
You may remember last year, I think it was last year, we did some TDR amendments as well and removed some receiving sites from Issaquah Highlands. That's right.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I was having trouble figuring out exactly where the receiving sites were. Where are the roads? Can you kind of, there's no roads on there.
Oh, I
Kind of
apologize.
map it.
I forget that sometimes. So does this work? So this is Front Street, right here.
Okay.
So this is Sunset, right here. So most of them are along Front and Sunset. This is zoned MFH. This is Front Street South, and that one is zoned multifamily high as well.
Page 32, 63
Yeah,
has the
it
roads
didn't
on
have
there.
the roads on
Not the
there.
road names, but you can see the roads. So it looks like it's Sunset, right? To the right?
Yes, Sunset right here,
Yep. And then
and Front
Front
right
Street.
here.
Yep.
Yep.
And the orange ones are receiving sites as well, correct?
These are receiving sites, but they're outside. They're, right. Some of these are in central and some of them are in the rest of the city. Yeah.
None of those are within the old town,
Correct,
none of them at all.
correct.
But they're right abutting.
They abut it, and they used to be in central Issaquah.
Okay.
And so, yeah, right now, we're just looking at Old Town. I don't know what'll happen there, but that used to be in central, which is why they became receiving sites.
And is there a limit to what transfer rights, how much, for example, could it be a 6-story addition to a receiving site? Is there some?
I think
No, there's limits.
Yeah, there's a limit. I
As
don't
to
know.
how much you can get with your TDR, with your 1 unit of TDR, there's a square footage that you're allowed, and there's a cap, so you can't get like a 100-story building on Gilman because you're a receiving site. No, there's a cap on it.
There's a cap.
And it would be really expensive to go that high, because you're paying market rate for these rights.
For the units.
And only
right.
one TDR per
No,
receiving.
no.
No, you can buy 10.
You can buy some,
Okay, just to be clear.
Right,
you can buy whatever
You
it
can buy
takes to
more
get
than
you to
10.
that max if you want to.
right.
Yeah. Okay, we good? Okay. Action 5, code revisions to allow small-scale retail in MFH. And you may say, but we have small-scale retail in MFH, and we do, and a lot of those were permitted a long time ago before we started making code changes. So there are some exceptions in here. But again, this was another task force recommendation, was that we see more retail in the MFH than on East Sunset Way. So the proposal is to allow standalone businesses not to exceed 4,000 square feet on East Sunset Way. 4,000 square feet is considered to be neighborhood scale. And so that is the proposal. So Rich, feel free to step in on this one, but as I said, there are different exceptions on how things exist. So some are allowed within a mixed-use building, anywhere from 1,500 to 4,000 square feet. Some are standalone, but they don't exceed 4,000 square feet. They were permitted a long time ago. So depending on the footnote, we added that exception right there to each one of them. So this one applies to retail and clothing and shoe specialty stores. There was a footnote on here for daycare centers, which we have since removed because we cannot regulate the size of daycare centers. We're going through there and put it in there and then went, whoops, can't have one there. So it may be in your packet, but we've removed that.
Right, because those are regulated by the state.
Right.
I know someone's going to ask why we can't regulate daycares.
Regulated by the state. Again, we added it to this footnote, which talks about where they're allowed and where they're not. It applies to laundromats, mailing services, and studios and galleries. Added again, laundromats, mailing service, and personal grooming services. And then this one was left off the packet, but veterinary clinics also, this applies to. They can have standalone
So they would be
businesses.
permitted, a veterinary clinic would be permitted as long as it complied with whatever it is, under 4.
It can't, right, can't go over 4,000 square feet. Right.
So they do 4,000 square foot on the first floor, and you have residential on second, third, and fourth?
They could, or they could just be by
Third,
themselves.
they only get 3 floors.
Okay, So
Right.
3 floors,
Right.
we have 3 floors. First floor is 4,000 square foot block of retail, and the rest could be mixed use along Sunset. Now we're changing the character of Sunset potentially.
Right, you can already do businesses within buildings that cannot exceed 4,000 square feet, right? You just can't do standalone business, standalone retail with 4,000 square feet.
Right.
Okay. And the last one, action 4, code revisions to require ground floor commercial on Front Street. Now, the task force talked about how they wanted to get more retail uses on Front Street, just because it promotes pedestrian activity and some window shopping, might increase business, makes it feel safer when you have more people on the streets. So we took it a little further and just required it. And so we added a footnote to several uses, which I'll show you in a minute. For properties with frontage on Front Street within the CBD zone, ground floor commercial/retail is required and must be oriented to Front Street and on the first floor with a minimum depth of 20 feet. And the 20 feet came from Central Issaquah. That is the same standard that we use there. And then the uses are these, and I'm not going to go over them all.
But those are all permitted now
Those are all permitted
in
now.
the CBD.
Yes. So if you put in a residential building, you have to have one of these uses on the first floor with a 20-foot depth facing front.
I expressed a concern in an email to you just from being in the business for a while and then just seeing different cities that have tried this stuff. As soon as you make this dogmatic, you're going to come in here, Mr. Developer, and you better like it or lump it. Most of them don't want. I mean, the numbers just don't work out. And eventually those numbers prove out to be true. So the ambition here is to increase the activity and the concentration in Old Town. And to me, and I'll just throw it out again, that this provision requiring as opposed to permitting or incentivizing, I think is working exactly in the reverse direction from where you all want to go. And I think you're going to find small developers, these are all small sites, it's going to be small developers saying, you know what, I really would like to do it on something on this side, but I don't want retail. And you're saying, well, too bad, you're going to have to. And thank you very much, I'll go to Kirkland.
Right,
Just
and
based
this is
on-
only for new businesses,
Yeah, I know.
not for the existing.
No, I realize, but it's new development.
Right.
It's new development. It's new development. So I'm just making the same comment I made to you, and you responded to it, I get it, but something I'll throw out there as a concern based on, and whatever. as
No,
a
you're right, and
concern.
I know that happened in Redmond when they tried to require retail everywhere. It was a much larger area, but they
Toronto,
tried
where
to.
I used to live,
Yeah,
disaster,
right.
et
And
cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I can go on. Monroe, blah, blah, blah. So
I think part of the hope is that because this is a smaller area as opposed to a really big area, which is what Redmond found, that maybe it doesn't, I don't know how to work out, but it's an effort.
If someone wants to, it's not clear to me, if someone wants to come in and do something that is code compliant but is not on this list, they can say, I want to do X, and it's not one of those. But it's a retail thing, they want to do it, and it's it's 3,900 square feet, so it's compliant with everything. What I'm saying is that this is not carved in stone, is it?
Well, this is the permitted use chart for this zone.
So nothing other than what's on that chart can go in.
you'd have to apply for
Can go on the
that.
first floor on Front Street, correct?
We're trying to think of a business
Like a
offhand that wouldn't be on that list.
A
And this is what-
marijuana
Well, I
retail
can't
shop
think-
could
I'm
not
I'm not
go.
a business, I
I can't think of a single business type that's not on that list.
A
Well, and this is-
marijuana retailer could not go on the Front Street on the ground floor.
Right. So these are the uses that are already allowed there.
'Cause it's
And there
not
is
a
a
permitted
category
use.
called retail/general or retail, general. So oftentimes, I think that's because if there are uses on here that maybe aren't described exactly like
Okay,
this.
that's,
I think that's
Right.
what that's for.
okay, so there is a retail/general that
Yes.
somebody could say,
And if,
in
Right.
addition to these, okay.
But if it's listed somewhere else, though, and it's not in CBD, you can't get there from the back and say it's general.
So I have a hobby shop.
Does that make sense, Randy? You're still,
Would run that by again? If it's
so if you're trying to get in, let's say you're
something that's not
a
on there.
retail, let's say you're a marijuana retail shop, and you're
a
thinking
good
you're general, or I'm trying to think of what's the next new use. You're a paintball range.
yeah.
And let's say we actually have that in under amusement or something. You can't try to get in under undefined if it's actually defined somewhere else and prohibited in that
Okay.
zone.
All right. But if it isn't, you can
But if it
apply
isn't,
and
if
then-
it's the new latest
Okay.
video thing that we haven't thought of, then we try to
That's-
make it as similar as something else and see if it fits.
So,
And I just checked, and I'm not seeing retail general on this list, but I checked the code right there, and it is allowed in
Okay.
CBD, so
Okay,
it
that's great.
applies.
And retail general would be like a bike shop or a hobby store or a toy
Yeah, those are
shop.
already on there.
Exactly, and I don't think you see bike shop up here, so yeah.
We should,
And
because
But there is a bike shop there, so.
Right, and so
Yeah.
my,
Yeah.
but that would, because of that, there wouldn't be allowed another bike shop?
No, it would be, I think it would be allowed. There's one already, it's not on this list, but it's also not in the list of permitted uses at all. So I think it falls under retail general.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm looking like a locksmith. I would consider locksmith a retail general. Liquor store would be retail general.
Well, that's just, the retail general is to get things, like I said, names change. And, where something used to be called
a video arcade.
a video arcade is, I don't, you might now have, there's something in Redmond that has a different kind of thing.
Right.
It's called something else, a
Right,
game
like
center or
pet
something like
daycare,
that.
that was a new one for us
Yeah.
a while ago, is we'd never heard of pet daycare, and now they're everywhere, so we had to add it to the list.
I think the only heartache I see is multifamily dwelling, 5+ units. Does that mean they can put 5 apartments on a ground floor on
No.
Front Street?
That means that if you're a multifamily, if you have a multifamily duplex, these are uses that have to have retail on the first floor. So if you build a multifamily building, you have to have retail on the first floor of that building.
Oh, okay, I read the list to be all the first floor.
Yeah, it's a little, I will admit, it's a little funky, but we wanted to, we were trying to be all-inclusive, so.
Got it, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Janice?
I'm with you.
There's a big sigh.
I had the same question.
Okay, all right. I think that's it, and we can do public comment. Yeah, I think that's it. If you're ready to do public comment, unless you guys have more questions right now.
Any more questions or concerns? I think you've.
Are we approving the amendments?
No, so I will tell you, we're going to see this again. If you all want to discuss it again on August 27th, we have that date, or August 22nd, we have that date open to talk about the amendments again. Either way, if you do or if you don't, the public hearing is scheduled for September 5th, so you'll see them at least one more time. Twice, if that's
And
what
if
you
you
want to do.
wanted us to try and get someone from economic development to talk about parking, what about businesses when they close? Do we know why they're closing? And perhaps how they feel about ground floor required retail on Front Street, for Randy to be able to talk to more of an expert than the planners?
And neighborhood-oriented businesses and how they feel about those.
Right. If that would be helpful to you all, we could bring in Christopher or Tim. I think it would be Christopher, though,
Probably Christopher.
to
I
talk.
think
and-
those are all questions that are valid and should be
Okay.
discussed before you make any final decisions on this.
Well, how about if-
Especially if it's valid for you all, if that helps you feel better or worse about the amendments, then we're happy to try to give you more
Well,
resources.
I'm looking at it as once the discussion is there, you might change some of what you
Sure.
have in the amendments to make it more valuable to the businesses or the community.
Okay, so we could focus the next meeting. Granted, we haven't heard from the public yet, so this is a little early to say this, but, maybe the next meeting could focus on those topics.
Right,
And,
right.
I'd like to,
okay,
for what it's worth, just to get a better understanding, not necessarily to seek changes, but I'd just like to, things like,
Right.
what are we learning from people that are leaving?
Right,
Why?
right. I figure the more information we have, the better decisions we'll all make.
Do you have another question about parking? Should I table that till after public comment or bring that up now?
I would ask
Now that
the
I've had
chair.
time to think about the question.
Why don't you bring it up now?
Okay, so the parking requirement is based on use. Shouldn't it be based on square footage?
It's based on both. So if you're medical, it's often based on the number, I have it out there, but it's
like 3 per
number of
1,000 square
employees
feet.
and square footage. And then, office is 1 parking space per 300 square feet. Retail is 1 parking space per 100 square feet. Residential is 1 parking space per unit.
Okay.
So it's both use
Yeah.
and square footage, you're right.
So in terms of use, if it's retail space, or, because a doctor's office could move out and a retail store could move in.
Right?
So shouldn't it really be based off of maybe commercial square footage versus residential square footage?
So that is
They have
it could be, I would say that, though, like I said, the overall parking, this is all in the land use code, and the land use code, parking section, and all of the land use code is going to come through PPC. But that's a big change. That's a huge change that would apply citywide
Right.
and not just to Old Town.
Right.
So,
And the categories are already all sorts of commercial, all sorts of retail. Residential's in a different category because it's just a different category of how to park a residential unit. But as you said, all the commercials and retails have different parking requirements based on the use and the size.
You see, to me, that seems like it creates a lot of ambiguity.
Why?
Because if you have a commercial space and you have a use, that use disappears and becomes another use, then
so the change of use provision only applies right now in Old Town. It doesn't apply throughout the rest of the city. So
Right.
in the rest of the city, if somebody changes from office to office to restaurant, they would have to increase the parking.
Okay,
Right.
so I think this could go on because I don't think there's there's some questions that Ron really needs. So why don't we table that and have you sit down with staff and get that particular thing answered? Then when you come back, you can discuss it with the rest of the commissioners so they understand it.
okay, I like that idea. Sure.
Okay. Do you want to take public comment?
Yeah, so I see actual bodies in the audience, so I'd like to know if anybody would like to come up to the microphone and make a public comment. Please come up. This one? That one, just tell us who you are and where you live.
Okay, my name is Ashley Saunders, and matter of fact, you had pictures of a piece of property that I used to own, I sold, and they built them. It's these 2 units that they're high units, which is the 6 unit and the 7 unit. I used to be one of the owners of that property, and they built it, but I sold them to the guys that built them. But question is now, you're taking away all the TDR rights away from this, pretty much all Sunset. So now, but I hear you saying something about you're going to go from 50% to 75% non-pervious on these properties? So you can cover more soil. Are you reducing the parking
No.
too?
No, the proposal is that if you're on East Sunset Way, the parking stays the same. If you're in CBD, though, the CBD part is expanded for the parking change.
Well, we're talking about
You're talking about East Sunset Way?
multifamily high.
On East Sunset,
Multifamily high.
on East Sunset Way?
On East Sunset, on East Sunset Way.
Right, I don't believe that changes.
That's okay, let me go back there real quick. Close your eyes. You're dizzy.
Oh, do you need?
So, oh yeah, we do have an extra packet over
I
there.
have one extra packet.
I think-
That's all I had, you'll have to share.
Do you have another one? I can,
Oh, can I give him yours?
yeah, I wrote on the front of it, but you may.
So to answer your question, the additional 10% that we're talking about for neighborhood-oriented businesses, that's only in the cultural business district. What we're talking about expanding, which we'll talk about again, we currently allow no additional parking required for a change of use and no additional parking required for structural additions that are less than 10% of what's already existing. Right now, that only applies to part of the cultural and business district. We are proposing to expand that piece of it to East Sunset Way, which might reduce the parking, or not reduce it, but limit what has to go in there.
Reduce the requirement.
Right.
As of right now, you have to have 2 parking stalls per unit.
Okay.
Yes.
I'd
I
have to
believe
look.
so.
I don't know. Yeah.
So there could be a proposal maybe reducing those down to maybe.
Do you want to get back up on
Yeah,
that?
once you,
Would there be proposal to be any reducing the parking if you had like a duplex on Sunset or multifamily property?
I don't know if it's use by use, that we haven't gotten that far yet, as far as if it's residential and commercial, or if it's just the uses.
Right.
But that's a good question that we'll
Okay.
make sure we figure that out before the public
And did
hearing.
I hear you right that all the parking along Sunset is going to be gone? Public parking along the road?
Yeah, I don't know that
Said
project.
that you're going to put turn lanes in on Sunset, and you're going to get rid of the side parking?
not used to the Q&A. That's okay. We haven't been directly involved in that. The last one that I saw, and I hope nobody shoots me, I think the last one that I saw showed parking allowed on alternating sides of the street, because yes, I think Randy, you're right, there was a median down the center, and then parking was allowed on part of the north side and part of the south side. That was the last one I saw. Yeah, Randy's not sure. But there are changes, but it's on our website. I'm not exactly sure what it is. Yeah, but you could check that out on our website.
I got to ask, why?
Just to-
Why?
We could have Kurt come talk about that.
My understanding from when I saw this on the Development Commission, when it was put up there, was the objective is to improve the traffic flow on Sunset out to 90 and into the town from 90, and it's in compliance with state changes of the interchange, the 90 interchange. This is 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Right.
But the objective of what we were shown there, which was the plan for Sunset, that as I recall, and, memory's the second thing to go, it was both sides. There would be no on-street parking. Now, that may have changed,
Okay.
but that was what we saw with the...
That's
with
what
the-
I read,
With the
too.
landscaped median strip in the middle, but there would be essentially 4 lanes of traffic.
But I do believe that it's on our website, so if anybody wants to see that, they can
And when
find it there.
Stephen comes next
Oh, that's
meeting, we
right.
can ask
That's
Stephen
right.
that to add to his questions
Yeah,
that we're
Stephen
asking
Padua
him.
is going to be here talking about the mobility master plan on the 22nd, so he can answer all those questions.
Yeah. Because that was the significant question when we were in the DC was shown that, is where are those people that are parking on Sunset now, where are they going to park? I remember that specifically, and there was significant discussion about that.
Okay.
And what does that do to the overall extra parking that
Exactly.
the city keeps saying we have?
Yes.
Do you have another question?
But let's not do Q&A. You have questions?
All right. All I'm saying is if you take away all the parking, I mean, all these properties they're not supposed to ingress and egress from Sunset. They're all supposed to come from the alleys. They don't have any parking, so maybe you take all these little places, you're going to say they're going to have businesses and stuff, or the businesses are already there. If they have no parking in front, you're taking away all their business.
Cheers.
Would anybody else like to make a comment?
I read that on the website.
Thank you for taking my comment. I'm J.J. Lin, and I own a property at the very end of Front Street. So thank you for the report and things like that. I'll just go with my first major concern, which was action item 4, which was mandating if you were ever to develop your land, mandating basically retail. And I think retail is great, but I think the city should be incentivizing it and not mandating anything. And I think that's wrong. And I'm actually quite upset when I looked at these 19 points. And I think you'll get the same kind of comments from owners, existing or not, or maybe they have retail. But I think it is wrong to mandate how people can develop their land, period. I think what we haven't discussed in all of these proposals is we haven't gotten a study on whether or not these proposals actually increase the market value of the area in the CBD or decrease it. No one's addressed that. Why? Because I think several of all these action items decreased the value of property. And I'm not here to say, well, we can't do this, because I think we need change. But on balance, I believe it decreases property values in the CBD. What does that mean? It means that I'm going to take all 19 of these action items if they're passed, and the next time I pay property taxes, I'm going to go to the assessor and say, these are the reasons why my property is worth less. Transfer, it was very complicated. I didn't quite understand that. But that is basically saying that I can no longer basically have the option of developing by transferring, by using someone else's right to develop. That lowers the property value of my property. I think we talked a lot, I don't know you, Mr. Fall, but I'll say Ron, you had a lot of questions about parking. I don't have the packet that you guys had that said that we have excess parking, but I think I'll just direct you to that action item, was it 15 or something on that parking? If you read it, what it says is the city will now allow you to have a 35% reduction in parking instead of 25%. What does that actually mean? In my mind, I'm just giving my opinion, and if you need 100 parking spots, and I'm just using a hypothetical here, based on your property size that you're going to build, you actually only need, if you have that reduction, was it 75 right now? They're saying, well, we're going to increase the impervious surface from 85 to 95, and then we're also going to reduce the parking requirement, because now they're going to give you a credit of 35%. So now you have to, not only are you building more, at least at the ground level, you actually have less parking. So I don't see how, if our goal is to create more parking spaces and make it attractive to shop here, how this new proposal will actually increase parking, and it doesn't. Mathematically, it decreases parking, and it's going to eat up that buffer. I don't know what the buffer is, but I think that's it. And then, you know, we didn't talk about all the 19 items here. I mean, they proposed, I think, some of the ones that maybe were important or they have already done work on. But for example, I live on a piece of property, and my property has trees. If you're in, I guess, on Front Street, where the restaurants are, you don't have a big tree on your property. But the reason my property value is decreased is because I have a tree that's considered maybe critical to the habitat or whatever. It's considered an important tree. There's a lot of regulations on trees. So when the impervious surface goes from 85 to 95, it's actually just an illusion for my property, because I literally have to keep that tree. And so I consider that to have decreased the value of my property. And so I think, and then my last thing is, there's a schedule on, you know, passing the amendments and things like that. And my question is if we haven't done all 19 of these steps, how can you pass 2, 3, 5, 6, kind of cherry picking the whole list, right? So if you reduce the height of the building, but then my question is if the design or the number one, you know, changing the, or mandating sort of some design in the CBD area, well, how are you going to design a building when the new design recommendations aren't there, but you've already reduced, you've already changed basically how the building can be built? And so I don't know what the process is for all of this stuff, but I just feel like without consideration of property values and, you know, looking at all these changes from a holistic basis, I mean, how does that make sense? And I know that, you know, I'm not here to say we need to build this or, you know, block this, but I think we should have a sensible approach, which is everything needs to be considered. There were 19 lists on that immediate item list. Why are we doing 2, 3, 6, I mean, just giving an example of the ones that we presented. What happened to number 1? What happened to basically the vegetation rules that we need to abide by? And so I think that if you just, for example, change the pervious surface without taking into account whether or not trees or whatever need to be taken into account, I think that's just an incomplete kind of plan. And I think that's all I have, so I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything?
Well, I'll just say that he has echoed some of the concerns expressed around this. Both gentlemen have echoed some of the concerns around this table, and perhaps that's given some weight to those concerns. So.
So as to all of the other action items, the other 14, are they ones that have been put on hold? Or are they just to get clarification for the gentleman that spoke? That
There's a status
Yeah,
report
there's a status report
in the
here.
packet that shows where we are on all 19.
And it's to happen over 2 years, 2019 to 2020. I can't find the status report.
It's on page 48 of 63.
Oh, there it is, thank you.
Oh, wait, that's not the first page of it, though.
47, I see it. So number 1, we start on the 12th. 2 through 6 and 15, we're trying to do all together now because they're all code revisions in the land use code. Parking analysis has been done, and Christopher will talk about that when he comes in. Work with King County Metro, it's in-house, most of that's going to happen in 2020. It's ongoing, but let's see. Cut through traffic in neighborhoods, that's going on currently. We did some temporary work back in 2017 and 2018. It was temporary work, it turned out to be effective, so those are in place permanently. Some other issues have arisen through, say, the Darce neighborhood and around the school. So the school district and Public Works Engineering have already met with neighborhood residents with some possible solutions that they hope to have implemented by Labor Day weekend. Let me see. Market Historic Downtown Issaquah, that's up to the Downtown Issaquah Association and Economic Development, and they're working together. Inventory of missing pedestrian and bicycle facilities will happen in 2020, I think, as part of the Mobility Master Plan, when that takes place, because it's another large project. Front Street, that was something that was adopted back in 2017, I believe, the Front Street Downtown Streetscape Plan. And we're working on getting those built. Phase 1, part of that has happened, part of it will happen later. It's all funding. That's all dependent on funding. The plan is there, we're just implementing it. It's not happening as fast as we probably would like it to happen. Again, work with Downtown Issaquah Association to implement the plan. Let's see, Front Street trees, that's part of it. 15 code revisions to expand sidewalk use district, that is in process.
That happened Monday night.
It happened Monday night. It's done. Okay. Old Town boundaries. We talked about the Old Town boundaries last year and talked about changing them and decided not to change those until we made our amendments. And we would look at them 1 year after we made the amendments to see if changing the boundaries made sense based on what we had done. So that one we need to wait on. Wow, streetscape plan again. And then Sustainable Action Program is ongoing. It's been adopted, and they're implementing it as projects come through. I believe there's talk of making regulations out of those, but right now it's encouraging businesses to do this. So,
Some of them are
so a lot of them have happened or are happening or are separate from code amendments because they're marketing efforts or trying to find money for something that's already in place. So, yeah.
They're basically all being considered and worked on. Will the couple that need to have changes or to look at that you were talking about, will they come back here for discussion or anywhere for discussion?
Which couple? Like the boundary changes?
Whatever that you're looking at changes. I don't have
Yeah,
it in front of
anything
me, so I can't remember which
Anything that
one.
has to do with the land use code will come here.
Okay, so we will have an opportunity to discuss some of those other plans that.
Yes. And obviously, the standards will come through here, and architectural standards will come through here.
Okay, so what do you think is I know when you looked at the list of how things are happening, it was an approval by the city council in October? Isn't that what's?
For these amendments, yes.
For just these
For
amendments?
just these, yes.
Okay, so since they're under consideration and they won't be really decided on for the next couple weeks, are you going to not give any permits based on the old things? Are you just going to kind of stop doing it, or are you going to continue on with the permits as they are?
We're required to continue on with permits as they are.
Okay, so,
There are two that are-
so somebody comes in and gives you starts the process and actually gets it done. By the time it changes, then you're fine. So normally, once the city council makes the ruling that, yes, we love these new amendments, go forth and create, at that point in time, do they become rules, or do they generally say in 6 months they will go into effect?
They generally become effective 10 days to 2 weeks after council adopts them.
Okay.
And there have been exceptions, but that's generally the rule.
Right, and we've notified the folks in the pipeline
Right.
that these are being looked at so that they know if their project will work with these standards or if they should go faster to make sure they're vested under the existing standards.
Right, and I will tell you, the current planners, every time someone has come in and talked about a project in Old Town, the current planners have let them know that these changes are being proposed. I
So
understand.
normally, like this gentleman, if he has he's going to build this wonderful thing and he hasn't applied for the permits yet, the chances of him getting a permit or get to a point where his grandfathered in 2 months is very limited?
It depends on, sometimes it depends on the person doing it.
But it's
What's
possible.
It's possible.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's all I wanted
It
to
depends
know.
on the efficiency of the applicant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm asking these questions because somebody asked me today what exactly was, what it was, and I went by the October 9th date on your calendar.
Right.
That's the plan. Could be changed.
It could change, and, now that we don't have committees anymore, I'm not quite sure how the process will work. I mean, it goes to council. I don't know if it'll go once, if it'll go twice. I don't know how that works yet, because this is brand new as of this month, so
Right.
I don't,
Okay, so stay tuned.
yeah.
Anything else?
Madam Chair, tonight we did it the way, I was going to suggest before the meeting that we make a procedure change to, instead of having audience comments come after other business, that we allow members of the public that do attend the meetings to present their opinions and questions and so on, not as the last thing in the meeting, but as, for example, move it from 5 to 4 to give the public a chance to speak before we shut down discussion. So just as an agenda item, if we could have the public have the opportunity to speak in the context of this subject of the meeting.
Right.
And then have other business after the public has had a chance to speak and the staff has had a chance to address their questions, and commission members have a chance to,
It works both ways, because when you're there and you want a question answered, you can listen to the discussion, and maybe you'll think of something else to have a question about or discuss. So I agree with you, but I don't know. It's up to the rest of what the commissioners want. But if I was coming in to discuss, I would like to hear what actually was on the agenda, not what the subject was we were discussing, not what I thought it was. And so that I could ask better questions, if that makes sense to you. But it's up to staff. Well, what do you think?
I think the agendas are made by a power bigger than us, and I'm always pleased that PPC is so relaxed that they always take public comments, whether it's a public hearing or anything. If you're sitting there, we ask you what your thoughts are.
And I think that's great. I mean, I
Right.
really do believe that the whole thing should be focused on giving members of the public a chance to speak. But we actually, on the DC, we actually, because of public requests over a period of time, changed the public comment period to be following the staff presentation and the applicant presentation, and then the public members, that was
Okay.
when the public, because then they could address directly what they had just heard from the staff and the applicant. And then, other business was after that was the last thing.
I can certainly
So
ask.
it's just a switching around of
Yeah, I
things.
can
But if it's-
certainly ask if we have flexibility. I know we always do it that way,
Yeah.
but it's just
It's
their
looking at me
agenda.
because I never follow the.
Well, it's just,
You're
it
just
doesn't matter whether
flexible.
it's a public hearing. I really
Right.
think that giving the public a chance to speak or ask questions, whether it's a public hearing or not, is a really good thing.
Right.
I'm just saying it.
Well, let's consider that, and maybe we can try it once or twice and see how it works out. And if the powers that be that make the agenda, if it works that way. I mean, it's a little different in my estimation than development, because they're coming to present a specific thing that you are going to talk about. This is kind of like it, but not really. But let's try it.
Okay.
Let's see if.
Because I think we just did it the way I think it should.
We always have discussions after the, and I think if there was somebody who had another question, we've always let them to come back, and we'll see.
Okay.
Let's,
Okay.
I don't know, give me some,
Do we have to have a fix, I mean,
no, we don't
can we
have
not
to,
leave it as flexible and kind of a sense of the meeting as it flows?
I think the reason that we did it that way on the DC was that we usually had more people coming, and it got into a endless, I want to go back to what was said a half an hour ago. And it just puts, if there are a lot of people, define a lot of people, usually it was 4 or 5 that showed up at every meeting and had done their research and had, questions, recommendations, really good stuff like we heard tonight, then there's a public comment period, and then there's an opportunity for the staff and the commission members to address the concerns that were raised. And then it goes into other business. But if it just keeps a little bit more focus on the agenda item that we're here to discuss, like the amendments, it's just, if you don't have anybody that shows up from the public, then it doesn't matter what the agenda says.
so when we have multiple things on the agenda, we always stop after each one to give the audience comments. That's why we're here, is to hear from an opportunity to hear from the community. That's why we're televised. That's why we're doing that. So let's just talk about this and see. That's what happened today, you're saying. So it flowed tonight unless you see something different. So let's talk about it. Maybe we'll look at it and see. Maybe it'll depend on what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Right, because for
I wonder if
example,
we have
next
to make a
meeting,
hard decision now as opposed to...
No, we don't have to. No, I'm just,
maybe-
it was a
Right.
suggestion.
But it's a suggestion, and every member who has a suggestion on changes could be for the better. So let's just look at that.
Because, for example, next meeting is the mobility master plan and the Old Town code amendments. So usually we let folks comment on both,
Right.
after each one.
Whatever the agenda is.
Okay, so is there anything else?
Not from me, except there's an extra meeting on your calendar. I don't know if you noticed. We're starting to work on housing strategy number 9, which is the one that includes those that have housing vulnerability, that need services, special populations. And we're tentatively meeting with the Human Services Commission on that part of it, and that would be on their night, which is a Tuesday night. I'm on your last page of your packet. Tuesday, October the 22nd, which is a completely different night than you usually meet. But since they're running the project, it's called the Healthy Communities Project, but they would like our help with the housing part of that. And so that would be the night, at least at this point, that we think we would meet on that. And the fun doesn't stop there. In October, we also get to meet with the Development Commission, of which we love the Development Commission. We get to meet with them on the 24th of that month. I believe, though, that that's on a Thursday. That's on our night. So we'll be asking them to join us here, in the middle of the dinner table, as we call it, so that we can all talk about the Old Town architectural standards. So just wanted to point that out, that for a while now, we're going to have 3 meetings a month. So I hope you're eating your Wheaties so you can handle a kind of an uptick in the schedule.
If we did what we did last year,
Yes.
this is
There
a
was
piece of
certainly
cake.
a lot of Wheaties going on last year, that's true.
Okay, the one thing I want to just comment on is the reason why we go over the schedule at the end of every meeting is not just because to remind us what it is, but it also gives the community the opportunity to, maybe if they're listening to this meeting, they're going to know that the next one is something that's going on when it is, and if it has an interest for them. So that's why we're doing it, not just to remind us.
Right, of the
Although it's
excitement
always
ahead.
good to remind us.
Yes.
Anything else?
Yeah, I know I'm not going to be here on the 22nd of October.
I'm not going to be here either.
On the 22nd of August?
October.
Oh, October.
Oh,
That
I will be
Tuesday
here
meeting,
October.
I'm going to be, that date, I will not be in
So
town.
no Randy.
What about the 22nd of August? Ron, will you be here?
I may not be here August
Okay,
22nd.
but so far we have I see Randy nodding yes, Janice nodding, and okay, so I got 3. So just Ron's a maybe on August?
And I won't be here.
Oh, and you're not here, but you're not here the 5th either, right?
I'm
September 5th, okay, so no Joan. Okay, and then maybe Ron.
What's the protocol for the chair and the vice chair? If they're not, I honestly don't
Oh,
know.
wow, I'll have to draw straws. No, I think we kind of have like a mini vote of those that are, is that how we've done it in the past? I think last time Lindsay drew the short straw and got to be the chair when you were both gone last time.
It would be nice to know if you are coming, to know that you are going to chair, because you need maybe a little bit more preparation. So
Do you want to talk about that now?
if right now, Ron doesn't know if he's going to be here the 22nd.
I'll know by the end of next week.
Okay, so at that point in
End
time,
of next week, okay,
That's sufficient time?
right. Do you want to talk
2
about,
months off, so we got time, right?
do you want to talk about long range if you both were gone on the 22nd? Since you have so many people here, or do you want to just,
I think it all depends on who's going to be here.
okay,
It's going to be somebody different, so,
okay,
and anybody can, any of these guys can chair the meeting. It's just, they
okay,
should know before they walk in here that they're going to be chair.
right, surprise.
Surprise. Okay, so we'll go with that right
Okay.
now. So if Ron's here, that's great. If not, then we'll punt and see who's going to be at the next meeting, and one of them will chair
Right, and speaking of schedules, if you're like Randy and you already know that you're going to miss some of these, I would love to know that ahead of time, because as you know, I'm kind of a nervous Nelly when it comes to who's going to be here and who's not going to be here. So that would help my blood pressure, if knowing already that you're not going to be here, or that you are going to be here. So
I would
just saying
love to
thanks.
give Bill the chance to be.
I wouldn't mind trying it.
Okay, with that, I'm going to close the meeting at 8:40.
8:20.
8:20 or 8:40?
8:20.
8:20, excuse me, take
It's
that
at the
back.
4. It's at the